Anyone who is anyone in the DevOps industry, or in IT for that matter, has read Gene Kim's Phoenix Project or the Unicorn Project. He is a fascinating character who I've personally known for the last 3 or 4 years, and in this podcast, I get the opportunity to sit down and talk about the software revolution and DevOps. Welcome to the Tech Seeking Human podcast, brought to you by Dynatrace. Hi everyone, welcome to the Tech Seeking Human podcast. My name is Dave Anderson and I'm joined by a very special guest today, none other than DevOps guru, Gene Kim. Gene, welcome to the podcast.
So delighted to be here, and it's so fun to be on so many adventures together this year. So congratulations on all your achievements this year, and great to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, we had you on our Perform event, which is the Dynatrace conference, maybe a couple of months ago. We did that virtually, and that was a lot of fun. And before you answer, we go way back because I don't even know if you remember, but maybe 5 or 6 years ago, you ventured out to Australia and I sort of bailed you up in Australia, and we had you at a couple of different events, and we have a mutual friend in Paul Muller, and we got talking in the back of a taxi and all sorts of things way back when.
Yeah, I think that was about 7, maybe even 8 years ago.
Oh, gosh.
Almost a decade. And by the way, it was I was so impressed by and dazzled by at the Perform conference how you, like a maniac, introduced live elements directly into the programming, which is something that you were doing some things that I just didn't think was possible in that medium. So it was so fun to compare notes afterwards and see how you pulled off that magic. And it was just awesome to hear just like how you pulled it off and like how much work you put into it, because it really showed.
Thank you. I'm going to, with your permission, publish that quote to my LinkedIn profile, because doing it like a maniac is actually what I've always aspired to. But a lot of what we're going to talk about today actually is the culture of DevOps and how high-performing teams act. And actually what we did on the back of the event, we got feedback from you that said, hey, we really liked your Perform event and us as a team want to dissect what you did. And I even took the learning of your learning, which is your team went away, dissected our content, then came together to workshop. In itself was a really interesting learning for our team to do the same sort of thing, like go and individually learn, then come back, compare notes, collaborate, talk to the source, and then come back to decide what you're doing. Is this something that you guys always do? Because it seems like a pretty functioning thing to do as a team.
I would like to think so, but I mean, I think the more honest answer is that 2020 was a crazy year, and how many we do 2 live events, and it really supports my primary area of passion right now, which is studying not just high performing technology organizations, but specifically not the tech giants, not Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, Microsoft, but how large complex organizations are adopting those same DevOps principles and patterns and using it to not just survive in the marketplace, but to win in the marketplace. And so, we had 12 events over since 2014. And, as we all know, 2020, there were no live events. And so I know that we made the decision 6 weeks before our June conference that it's not going to be live, that we have to figure out how to run a virtual conference. And, I think both you and I sort of chuckled, but I mean, it was true. I went to every virtual event I could, and they were uniformly mostly pretty bad.
Yep.
And so we were just really trying to form our own opinion about like how we should do things. And I was so pleased by the way that our 2 events went, one in June, one in November. So I continue to go to online events just to see what people are doing. And I got to tell you, seeing what you did at Perform was astonishing. I mean, I think there's some, that feeling when you sort of think the space, and then you see someone do something that you just didn't think possible. Yeah. Right? And there were a couple of those moments. And what I told you and the team was I can even point to the Slack. In fact, I even posted a screenshot of our Slack message. It's like, is Dave live? It's like, what sort of maniac would do that? Because it's my friend Patrick Dubois, who I collaborated with on the online events, who's also famous for helping actually coining the word DevOps. He spent 6 years in a startup that was supporting live events for TV. So think like voting systems for American Idol, right? He said his advice that he gave me was only do live if you absolutely need danger in your life. Right? So the fact that you voluntarily did it live was that's the reason why I called you a maniac. But I thought the results were just worth it. I mean, it was just it paid off.
Yeah, and I mean, look, that's interesting advice, because for me, it was like it had to be live because everyone was doing these pre-recorded. I've done presentations, it's soul destroying. You just need to be in a moment with people. I think the whole point of events is this feeling of engagement, connection, networking. And we took it some way. And yeah, I appreciate it was manic and a little bit crazy. And the team didn't like it because it pushed them out of their comfort zone, because Australia doesn't have great internet connection. And I said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it live. And they're like, you're nuts. And I'm like, what's the worst thing that could happen? If the internet fails, I pull my phone out and I have a fallback. I have another plan. So we really appreciate the feedback. I think this is all part of learning. This is part of evolution. It's about testing as well. You know, there's a lot of DevOps principles that comes back to what sort of we did. We had things in place for failure if it was to occur, and we did lose power an hour before one of the live segments. But I just felt like this was the new normal. This was the new benchmark that we had to run things. And so without making this podcast about what I did, I'd want to spin it back to you. And, you know, you're the author or co-author of DevOps books, the Phoenix Project, the Unicorn Project. These are like, anyone who's in DevOps has read the books. You've been doing this for 20 years, and you're sort of almost like, when someone mentions DevOps, you're right in the phrase with it. Like, what? How did you do it? Why did you do it? Where are we going, and how do you define it?
Yeah, so what are the attributes of high performers? It's the ones that can simultaneously deliver the most amount of features, right, on time, on budget, whatever, right, with consistency. It's the ones that can most reliably deliver great service, uptime, availability, reliability, and so forth, and have a posture of security and compliance, right? So the natural question is like, what are they doing differently? How did they get those outcomes? And so, around 2007, started getting drawn into this group of people that were, thinking about the problem space in a very different way. And where it all sort of came together was attending the 2010 DevOps Days in Mountain View. That was, Patrick Dubois ran that conference, John Allspaw, who was there, and his colleague Paul Hammond, who gave that famous presentation in 2009 that said we're doing 10 deploys a day every day at Flickr. Within the first 10 minutes of being at that conference, I mean, I sort of knew, oh my gosh, these are the people that I want to learn from. And so, over the next, 5 years, made it a point to go to every DevOps conference that I could find, and got a chance to interview and learn from so many of these people. And many of them have resulted in lasting friendships to this day, where we get to work on problems together, go on adventures together. So I guess that's the how. And I think for me, my area of interest is really not so much, quote, DevOps in Silicon Valley in the tech giants, but really to see how it's being adopted for where the majority of technology workers are, which is in large, complex organizations. And so Capital One has 20,000 plus developers. Yep. Target has 3,000 plus developers. And so there's just no doubt in my mind that when the 18 million developers that exist in those organizations are as productive as if they were at a tech giant, right, that will add trillions of dollars of economic value every year. Right? So as much value as the tech giants have created, which is trillions of dollars, right, that will be dwarfed by the amount that will happen in the broader industries.
Yeah, so let me touch on that, because then you started off by saying your aha moment was studying these unicorns, these like amazing companies that are doing great things with software. And then eventually everyone works out, hang on a second, doesn't matter what industry we're in, we're all in a software industry. Do you see a difference? Because for a user, it's like, I want an experience that's like Apple when I'm doing my insurance. They're setting the benchmark. So is that a real pressure? Is there a big difference at the moment, or are they closing the gap?
I think they're definitely closing the gap. That was a cross-population study that spanned over 36,000 respondents to understand what do high performers look like, and what are the architectural practice, technical practices, and cultural norms that can predict and create high performance. And so, one of the first questions that you ask is like, is DevOps only for the unicorns? And, what we found, year over year was like, no, DevOps is for horses too, right? There's no industry that's exempt from DevOps. It doesn't matter about company size. Although there's a little footnote there, a little asterisk. It turns out in 2019, there was one industry that was actually more likely to where you were likely to be a high performer, and that was retail. And which, when we found the finding, it was like, oh, of course, right? Because the competitive pressures are so high in retail right now, right? If you're competing against the likes of Amazon and the other e-commerce giants, you have to develop these capabilities. Otherwise, you're going to be go the way of, in the U.S. we called it Blockbusters, Barnes and Noble, and Borders Bookstore, right? So how do you avoid that fate?
It's one click. So I can't change my insurance company in one click, but I can change where I buy my shoes from in a click, right?
Yes, indeed. Right, exactly. And so, I think really it shows how important DevOps is for across every industry vertical. So are there differences? Yeah, for sure, right? Many of these tech giants were born in the age of software, and I love these case studies. One of my favorite ones is from Barclays, founded in the year 1635, which predates the invention of paper cash. But even older is HMRC, the UK HMRC, so the tax collection
know them
agency.
well.
That was
I lived there for a while. I had to contact them recently and say I don't need to do tax returns anymore. I haven't been there for 4 years.
Yes, and even they have, they did a DevOps transformation around the tax filing process, and that they were founded in the years 1200. Right?
Wow.
So the joke is we don't have any code that goes that far back, but certainly there's traditions and values that certainly go back centuries.
Wow. And so you were talking about the difference between high-performing teams. You said you do research. So forgive my really basic question here. Is this research that you've conducted yourself or with your team? And what were your findings? What does it look like? Because I'm always fascinated by people say, yeah, we're doing DevOps. And you're like, but there's a level of obviously DevOps maturity. How do you benchmark yourself as a team to go, well, we're about here on the spectrum?
So yeah, this is the state of DevOps research that started off in 2013, and that was in cooperation with Puppet Labs, as they were named at the time. And then, so this was with Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble, and eventually they started a company called DevOps Research and Assessment, affectionately known as DORA, and those findings actually went into the book Accelerate that I was a contributing author on. And that book eventually won the Shingo Research Publication Award, which is kind of delightful. And then that was eventually acquired by Google. And so the key findings really are, year over year, that high performers exist and they massively outperform their non-high performing peers. So there's 4 measures we looked at from a technology perspective. One is deployment frequency.
Yep.
And so high performers are doing multiple deployments per day, and versus monthly or quarterly for non-high performers. Code deployment lead times. And high performers, they can actually go from code committed into version control through integration, through testing, so that customers are saying thank you. They can do that in 1 hour or less, and versus a week to a month for lower performers. Change failure rates are 7 times higher. So in other words, when you do a deployment, these high performers are 7 times more likely to succeed without causing a 7-1 outage, a service impairment, a security breach, or a compliance failure. And when something goes wrong, like Murphy's Law does guarantee, they can fix it in 1 hour or less. So that's like 3 orders of magnitude faster than their peers. So, they're more secure. They're more likely to have to exceed profitability, market share, and productivity goals. Employees are happier. So all of that just says, yes, high performance do exist, and there's just so much evidence that shows that certain architectural practices, technical practices, and cultural norms absolutely do lead to higher performance.
What sort of percentages are we talking about? How many people fall into we're a higher performing organization? Like, just to give us an understanding of within the marketplace, what's that percentage? Is it a 20, 30, 50, 70%?
Yeah, these days, so in the earliest days, I think it was like 12 to 15% was in that high performing category.
Yep.
Over the years, the high performers have, I think the most recent one is like about 30%, of which 5% we actually called elite performers. So, really the answer is, the finding, the troubling finding, if you're a lower performer, is, you're falling behind, right? Yep. Of the population, of the respondents that we surveyed, of which spans anywhere from 3,000 to 8,000 in a given year, the percentage that are high performers are growing, right? So, I guess another way to say that is you could get away with being a mediocre performer a couple years ago, but that's increasingly less and less tenable.
Are you going to have to reset the goalposts as people get better?
What's magical about the survey analysis technique we use is in the early days, we heavily relied on a technique called clustering. So like, it tells us kind of what the performance profiles are, as well as the kind of the independent variables. What are the behaviors, norms, and so forth. So so the goalposts, I guess you could say, move every year, and that's how we kind of know for these populations, what does the performance look like, and so now we can compare each cluster to each other.
Yep. And so just really dumb question here for you. If I'm a leader of a DevOps team and I haven't come across this research before, is this something that I should pick up and try and evaluate my team against and set sort of some goals against?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, just Google State of DevOps research. It was conducted from 2013 to 2019. I would say all the metrics that I've read off, they're usually in the executive summary. Mm-hmm. And I would say the best, when someone asks, am I a high performer or not, there's a very easy way to tell. Mm-hmm. one of the most reliable ways is, you just ask, how long would it take me to push a one-line code change out or an infrastructure change out to production? Mm-hmm. In other words, what is the code deployment lead time? And if it's 1 hour or less, you are an elite performer. If you are a week to a month, we would categorize you as a low performer these days, right? Mm-hmm. And then the magic of how these measures go is that everything kind of goes up and down together.
Yep.
So
it makes sense. Now, crystal ball, because I love crystal balls, because 2020 just proved to us that you can't predict anything. But you've worked in the industry for 20 years. What do you see happening next? Or what are you seeing happening now? You said there was an aha moment in 2007 or whatever. Like, is there something else coming? Is there something that's changed as a result of the pandemic? Is there predictions?
Yeah, I don't claim any ability to prognosticate anything, but I will tell you that something I have a high degree of conviction around is, what are the obstacles facing the community? And it's because in these conferences, we always ask, and we're very deliberate about identifying what these technology leaders, what are their obstacles that they face as a community. Every presentation is an experience report where they're saying, hey, here's the industry we compete in, here's our organization, here's where we fit, or here's where I fit in the org chart, here's the business problem we set out to solve, here's what we did, here's what happened, here's the problems that still remain. So that problems that still remain, right, can kind of inform what is the gestalt of the obstacles. And I would say in the early days, it was very much dev versus ops, right? We don't have shared goals. We're at each other's throats, very much as depicted in the Phoenix Project. Over the years, I think that's changed. It's really, the obstacles become more external to the dev and ops value stream, right? It really has often more to do with security, compliance, regulators. And these days, I would say it's characterized primarily of, our biggest obstacle is to what degree do we have business leadership fully on board, where we have a mutually respectful, relationship where we understand that we're not codependent. We are mutually dependent upon each other, right? So, which is the reason why we've asked for as many presentations as we can where the technology leader and the business leader co-present, right? And we don't want a business leader who just acknowledges the technology leader. We want one who's saying, hey, all my goals, dreams, hopes, and aspirations were made possible by this technology leader, right? And so, I think that's kind of like the one prediction I would have is that the percentage of organizations that can have that kind of relationship will go up, and it's not high enough now.
But isn't that crazy? If every company is a technology company, how are their business leaders standing there not thinking that the technology was so critical? Like, that seems crazy to me.
It does seem crazy, and yet, I think the sad reality is that often technology is over delegated to quote the technology people.
Yeah.
That to what degree is technology truly integrated into all aspects of strategy and operations? And maybe one proxy measure is is there really that person at the top who's really can guide that digital journey,
yep.
right? And help and make informed decisions, or is this kind of PowerPointware?
Yep. And do you think, I mean, I was reading a book about, so my daughter is 10, I'm reading Tenager. And so they reckon that this generation is matured faster because they have a greater understanding of the internet and apps and everything, because they were the first generation that were born with an iPhone. So if we go back to the iPhone of only being 10 years, and I remember the iPhone coming in. So is it a transition of generations and generational leadership where, as new tech leaders come in, is it those people that come to the forefront that instill this, like, our business is technology and we need to be talking about technology in order to be successful? Do you see an evolution in that extent?
Yeah, for sure. And I just don't think that's fast enough, right? I mean, so I think kind of another, so one of my favorite books is The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Dr. Thomas Kuhn. So this was written, I think, 30 years ago. So the term inflection point, it came from that book. So that was popularized by Andy Grove, the CEO of Intel for many years. He basically what that book says is that, from afar, from sufficiently far back in time, whenever there's a revolution, whether it's Copernican to Newtonian, Newtonian to Einsteinian, it looks like it happened overnight and it looks like it was one person. But in reality, it was a whole bunch of people kind of proximate to that person. So Einstein and Newton get all the credit, but there were a whole bunch of mathematicians and scientists working on that problem, and sort of something clicked, right? The Einstein, the Newton, and then it just looks like the revolution happened. But and part of that revolution is, as Dr. Kuhn says, you have to wait for all the traditional worldview people to die, right, and allow this next generation to flourish. And I think the cynical person may say, in order for the digital revolution to fully take hold, we need to wait for the current generation of leaders to retire. But that is a deeply unsatisfactory answer. And so this is actually a learning journey I'm on right now. I recently interviewed Admiral John Richardson. So he was the chief of naval operations for 4 years. So in the U.S., that's the highest uniformed, highest ranking officer for the U.S. Navy that is responsible for the livelihoods of 300,000 sailors.
Yep. And
I learned so much in that interview. I mean, one of the aha moments that came to me was that to create a software competency, you really do need leaders at the highest levels that are deeply familiar with technology, what it can do, what it can't do, right, to inform strategy and decision making and operations. So, I think, what will happen in the next decade is, we've got to figure out as organizations, like how do you truly, bring in what is the role of technology leadership, in the modern organization, and the tech giants probably have it easier because they were born that way.
Did you get into artificial intelligence out of interest with this admiral? Because that's a very interesting topic on autonomous weapons and these sort of things. They probably didn't want to share it, but
it came up once or twice, especially in terms of like how. I mean, certainly, kind of how do you build systems that best achieve the mission? Whether it's the display for the sonar operator, to just the role of technology in general. I mean, let me see if I can recite this. It used to be the case that a ship, when it was launched, was the most capable the instant it was launched, and then for every year that goes by until it's decommissioned, it gets less and less capable. But he was saying with the advent of software, right, it's actually very possible that the ship actually gets more capable because of specific software changes that are made. And so that's like, oh boy, talk about a big idea.
Yeah, so like remote software updates to submarines and things like that.
Yeah. In fact, a mentor of mine, Dr. Tom Longstaff, who's the CTO at the Software Engineering Institute, he was briefing a general that we should make it a goal that we can upgrade the firmware in a missile system, ... while it's in flight.
Oh my gosh.
Which is
that's mind blowing, because like last night my car wanted to do a software update and it said make sure it's in park, and you can't use it, and you can't use it for 20 minutes. And I go, and I'm not like 30,000 feet under the sea or something. I'm not like the challenge of actually doing that to a submarine and the protocols around, because they got so many different vessels and things like that. It's actually mind blowing.
Yeah, one of the people who presented at DevOps Enterprise a couple of years ago, his name is Chris Hill. He was at Jaguar Land Rover. And so he developed a lot of the, I think they call it the infotainment system, but that actually is a gross understatement of what it is. It's basically all the displays, right?
Yeah.
So info, like, speed and then the radio display and so forth. Anyway, like he was describing how one of the things that they were experimenting with is being able to have like an A side and a B side, so they can upgrade the kernel on the A side and flip from the B side to the A side when it completes, so that you can actually potentially upgrade while driving.
Oh, I don't know if I want that. Well, I want the idea for it to know that it's going to fail and it could flip to the other one whilst it was driving, but I would want to be sure that it was being tested. Because it's, yes, to your point, it's running everything. It's not just, people look at it and go, oh yeah, it's my maps and stuff, but it's also connected to brakes, and now like the systems, like the cars can drive themselves. So it's pretty. Right. We go into a whole rabbit hole. I don't want to do this. Hey, Gene, how many books do you read a year?
A lot less than I used to. I buy many books, but complete far fewer. I would say, how many books do I complete in a given month? Probably about. I start a lot of books, and I'm very quick to bail out if it's not catching my interest, or if it's not deeply resonating with me. Yeah. I would say I probably complete maybe 4 or 5 books on average in a given month.
About one a week.
I might, for every one that I finish, I probably start 3 or 4 times as many.
I'm a technology leader today. What book or what 2 books should I read aside from the ones you've written?
Yeah, I would lead with Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal, and also Chris Fussell and Dave Silverman. And it was so cool to be able to interview Dave Silverman. So he was a lieutenant commander in the Navy SEALs. Chris Fussell was General Stanley McChrystal's chief of staff, or his aide de camp, one of those roles. And it was just, I got to interview Dave. And he actually presented DevOps Enterprise twice last year. And it was so interesting because I think one is for just a variety of reasons. I think that stories and problems presented in that book will deeply resonate with anyone in the DevOps community, because our version of Dev versus QA versus Ops versus security. Theirs was U.S. Army Rangers versus the intelligence analysts versus the Navy SEALs, and their goal was to dismantle the terrorist Al Qaeda in Iraq network in 2004, and they were smaller, but they were far nimbler, and they found that they simply could not dismantle the terrorist network, and it was because they couldn't act fast enough. Decisions routinely having to go 8 levels up in the org chart and 8 levels down, and repeat over and over again. So it was basically the waterfall process for trying to find and capture these terrorist leaders. And what they put into place, or that was the before picture. The after picture is really putting these people from different military branches and the intelligence agencies into mission-oriented teams where they worked together with a shared objective, and they pushed decision-making down to the edges. They connected middle-level leaders across this vast enterprise, and it unlocked all these capabilities where suddenly they could act and react faster than the adversaries. And it's just, I think there's so many lessons in that book that translate directly to DevOps, and actually reveal some surprising insights that I have found very that led to some serious aha moments. In fact, if I can just share one of them,
please.
I think for me, one of the things that I've been pondering with my mentor, Dr. Steven Spear, who he's most famous for writing the most widely downloaded Harvard Business Review article of all time, called "Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System." So that was back in 1999. And that was actually based on his doctoral dissertation at the Harvard Business School, where in service of that, he worked on the Toyota plant floor of a Tier 1 supplier for 6 months. And so he's taking all those learnings, applied them to healthcare, engine design at Pratt & Whitney, semiconductor fab manufacturing. And I think one of our conclusions or conjectures is that you can almost predict whether an organization is high performing or not just by looking at the communication paths in the organization and the intensity and frequency of the communication. Is it primarily up and down the organization? Where everything requires a vast escalation 8 levels up, and then 8 levels down to get 2 engineers to talk to each other? Or is the majority of the communication going across the organization? In other words, most of it happens within the team. Teams can talk to each other because there are sanctioned ways for them to do that. And when escalations happen, they escalate 1 level, not 8. And I think the reason why that's so important, because that represents to what degree can organizations do integrated problem solving. And so if you're going up and down the organization all the time, that's a very slow structure to communicate. It takes a long time to schedule these meetings. You lose a lot of information. And what Team of Teams showed is that you cannot, there are a set of problems where if you take that weeks to make a decision, you've lost the opportunity.
Yep.
What you want is that fast path between teams, within teams and between teams, that allow for fast integrated problem solving, where you get far better outcomes.
Yeah, fast decision making with fast communication between and trust within the team members as well.
Exactly. Trust is what allows signals to propagate through the system. So do you have a system where no one trusts each other and bad news or important news is suppressed or extinguished? Or do you have a high trust environment where even weak failure signals can be amplified and received, right, and be used to inform important decisions?
I've been in organizations before. I've seen and I've studied when I did an MBA. I've done all this stuff. No one ever said that the DevOps teams were going to be the high performing, highest functioning teams. It's almost like, and I might be completely crazy in saying this, but I go like, it's almost like you think of an elite sports team. And that's the analogy of what you're trying to bring within an organization. You have the legal team, the marketing team, accounting and finance and sales and all these people. No one seems to be as focused on speed, trust, confidence, communication more than the technology teams. It seems to be these software developers and these software teams, these DevOps teams that have become hyper-focused on how do we become a higher performing team. And it's that permeates out to the rest of the organization. It's absolutely fascinating. Have you considered that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is one of the things that Dr. Spear and I were pondering, which is why is it that so many of these patterns, kind of to massively simplify it in my head, I kind of view it as you have, a set of cohesive beliefs, maybe starting with Frederick Winslow Taylor, who created the scientific management, right, 120 years ago, and that led to things like waterfall projects, rigid command and control, running organization by Gantt charts, right, and so that kind of had its time, and then you have this other sort of cohesive beliefs and practices that led to things like psychological safety and agile and DevOps and high trust management, and that's led to amazing things like harnessing the atom and sending a man to the moon and safely returning back to Earth and DevOps and so forth. And so to rephrase your question, like why is it that technology seems to be the frontier for that, of which it is not the sole example, right? Apollo, I think we find the same norms as well as the Manhattan Project. And I think the reason why it's universally felt in technology is that it is a category of knowledge work and requires a creative and integrated problem solving, where trust and collegiality and integrated problem solving is it's a prerequisite, right? You can't solve tough challenges just within your silo. So that is exactly what we found in Team of Teams. So I think there's something about kind of these R&D type of efforts that make it even more important for these kind of conditions that we're talking about. So maybe just to add one more point,
Yeah.
I think the team's story, it really talks about the Army Rangers were the best at what they did, right? And the Navy SEALs were the best at what they did, but they couldn't work together, right? And so really that story is about how do you integrate those functional specialties combined with the intelligence agencies to to achieve the mission, just like in Dev and Ops, right? How you take the skills of Dev, QA, Ops, and security and use that to compete and win in the marketplace.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you for sharing. It's really good detail in what you've gone into there, because it's something that I'm picking up on as I deal with. I'm a marketer that happens to be working with technology teams, and I'm constantly learning about these people. And there are a lot of people that I interview, they are problem solvers with inquisitive minds that are then just leveraging technology, but they have to work with such vast different people to solve different problems. They're fascinating. It's been really interesting study. I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with us, because there's a lot in here as always to dissect. And the original reason for having you on was because you share so much great stuff. It's often hard to extract it all. I often struggle, like I had to rewatch the Perform presentation to go, right, this book, this principle. So it's nice to slow down slightly. Before we finish, I wanted to ask you just a couple of things to finish up with. The first one is a couple of fast questions. Your biggest inspiration?
Oh, biggest inspiration. Reading a book that I read, I think around 1999, called The Goal by Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt. So it's a novel about a plant manager who has to fix his cost and due date issues in 90 days, otherwise they shut the plant down, right? And so that book is obviously the inspiration of the Phoenix Project.
It's another damn book I've got to read. That's about 6 books now. And 3 dinner party guests, dead or alive?
Oh, what a great question. Ideal dinner party? I would love to, I don't know who these people would be, but as people involved in the mobilization of vaccination clinics, I got to visit the Portland Convention Center where they're vaccinating 8,000 people per day, up from 250. And I just would love to have a dinner party of people involved in mobilizing against the most important societal problem, right? We're in a race to vaccinate everybody on the planet, and I think there will be profound lessons learned in terms of how do we take these healthcare delivery systems that are often known to be very rigid and demonstrate this incredible adaptation that has been evidenced, as we ramp up the vaccination capacity. It is just incredible to see.
That says a lot about you, that you didn't actually come up with a person, but it's almost like your research, your inquisitive mind that makes you go, I want to talk to someone in this field. That would be interesting. That says a lot. Most of the world is in a race to get vaccinated. Australia's losing it at the moment. We're doing a very good job in preventing the virus from spreading in Australia, but a very bad job at the vaccination. The last question I have for you, you have to finish this sentence. AI will ...
AI will change the lives in ways we can probably not even comprehend or predict. And I say that with no real notion of what that could be. So, without a doubt, the next frontier.
Positive or is it negative?
I think it is our incumbent upon us as a society to figure out how to make it positive in the long term. So not to say that we won't have our bumps. And by the way, I think what's often overlooked in the AI game, especially in the data game, is that fundamentally is a software endeavor. And one of the things that really was interested in writing about in the Unicorn Project was how many times people are embarking on these massive data initiatives without applying, the best known software principles, and because they don't view it as a software effort, which is a little scary.
Why?
Because I think it is often viewed as a statistical exercise, and which it is, and it's viewed as an activity. But fundamentally, every one of the disciplines that we developed over the last 50 years around how to build software well must be employed in the service of these data programs. And it must be reproducible. It must be under some sort of version control. There has to be some sort of automated testing. There's got to be some sort of mechanistic way to change these models in production. So I think as an industry, we're still, that realization maybe has not totally hit in the way it is practiced.
Can we enforce it? What can we do about it?
I think this will naturally happen as some of these multi-million, multi-tens of $1 million initiatives fail, right? And eventually, we'll get people who understand software better, and I think they'll have a far better success rate in terms of achieving its goals.
Interesting. So thank you so much for being part of this. I want to leave one question. What advice would you give to your 16-year-old self?
Oh, the advice I would give to my 16-year-old self is, it may not sound interesting, but the advice I would give to my, even my 25-year-old self is do whatever you can to do internship as an auditor, maybe a a 1-year stint as an internal auditor. And the reason is that it's one of the few places where you get to see the internal end-to-end business processes. Often as a technologist, we're building things and we may never see the customer. We may never see the actual business goals. And we may never see pieces of the organization kind of outside of what's adjacent to us. Whereas an internal auditor will often see the entire organization. They'll see the 4 major business cycles, whether it's I used to know these: order to cash, procure to pay, hire to retire. There's one other one. And I think just having that holistic view of how organizations work and what those major cycles are. I mean, in general, it's always to know what the big picture is, and getting that early, I think, is never a bad thing.
That's awesome. It's really fascinating. So I've been talking to a lot of people in AI and algorithms and software and some really interesting TED Talk presenters, and all of them have talked about the importance of end-to-end, like simplify it down and really understand what are we in business for and how do we go from the product to the outcome. And very interesting, because then they're talking about how they're applying AI to these types of things as well. And then what are the outcomes of the AI? And the AI is only grabbing what it is that you can know. You have to know what you're grabbing before you grab it. Gene, you mentioned numerous times the importance of events, networking, engaging, these sort of things. I do hope we get back to the physical elements of the event sometime soon so we can get inspired once again, because I do suffer from virtual event syndrome where we get distracted by too many other things. Thank you for being on the podcast. Is there anything you wanted to share with us to finish? Is there anything we should look out for?
In fact, speaking of events, we are running 2 virtual DevOps Enterprises this year. So one is a Europe conference that's coming up in mid-May, and then the U.S. conference, which will be likely in October. So
awesome.
If you are interested in hearing technology leaders and what they're achieving in large, complex organizations, we're hoping to put on the best programming, even better than what we did last year.
Yeah, we'll share a link to that. I presume you're going to be live?
That's right. Maybe not quite as brave as you. We're still kind of trying to decide exactly where we're going to employ live, but it was inspiring and mind expanding to see what you achieved at Perform. So congratulations again on that.
Oh, thank you. Just say yes to them and just make them do it, Gene. That's my advice. And then let them figure out the rest later. Thank you very, very much for being on the podcast. We'll share a lot of those links, the books, a lot of your knowledge. We really appreciate it. I look forward to networking with you again. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Catch you soon, Dave. Thank you.
Thanks, Gene.